on Jesus, all things are possible. I can mount on wings like eagles and soar. When I call on Jesus, mountains are gonna fall. 'Cause he'll move heaven and earth to come rescue me when I call.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to another It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanjo. And today I have a very special guest with me. I know that you're going to be inspired by his story, by his journey, and I know you're going to be blessed by what he has to share with you. As usual, we start with, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, "With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome. Our very special guest, as you can see, is a gentleman. And I am smiling because when I smile, it links with what he does as a profession. But I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about himself before we get into his profession. Please tell us your name, where you were born, and what school you went to.
Okay, so my name's Chris Brooks. What was the rest of it?
Where were you born?
Where I was born?
Yes.
Okay, so I was born in a hospital called Dudley Road Hospital in Birmingham in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that like growing up in Birmingham?
So Birmingham as a place, when I was born, I was born in 1977. Gave away my age there. But yeah, when I was born, it was an interesting time. I think many people's parents had just, kind of started to make a life for themselves here from the West Indies. And so that was the scenario when I was born. My grandparents had come over and sent for the children one by one. And then I would have been that first generation coming out from there. So what I found growing up, my grandparents, my uncles and aunts, we were all kind of almost like one extended family. And then we started to move out and kind of establish our own families. So very interesting time, still on the cusp of, racism, teddy boys, those kind of eras there. And so schools could sometimes still be quite racist and what have you. That was the general climate. That was the general climate.
So you had a village that helped to raise you, but you still had to contend with racism in the schools. What kind of tips did your parents give you, or what kind of coping strategies did you use within the school environment?
So I was brought up in a single parent family, just my mum, which I think has a dynamic in that whole sphere of how you handle stuff like that. And also because those kind of issues of racism, I don't think my mum really, kind of understood it, because obviously she would have come from Jamaica when she was in her late teens. So she would have had to experience it in the workplace. But as children and school and what have you, I think it was new for her. And so I think the advice or the coping strategies was, I don't think it was always very apparent, especially in this country. I don't think racism is always very explicit. And so we were kind of maybe taught to just work harder than everybody else. Work harder, to an extent, the Christianity side of things. So my family, I was brought up in a Christian home, more or less. I think my mum She might have kind of turned away from the faith for a little while, and then come back when I was maybe about 4 or 5. So the Christian side of things, or turn the other cheek, also maybe put us in a space where maybe there's kind of a deliberation as to whether we really handled it in the most effective way. But nevertheless, that's kind of where we were with it.
I'm sensing that you might have had a lot of deliberation to do when you met upon racism. How exactly did you how exactly did that work for you? Turning the other cheek, working harder. Was it
it
the most successful and the best way for you looking back?
Looking back, I don't think so, because what it did is it put us in a space of not always valuing ourselves.
Mm.
Um, we were never quite sure what the issue was. Is there something wrong with me? And you tend to kind of come through with your head bowed low, kind of uh, not really being aware of your own sense of value or sense of self-worth in those rooms, which then has a big implication as you start to try and progress educationally and in terms of careers. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And I'm listening to what you're saying, and we've just completed Black History Month. And um, interestingly, the theme for Black History Month in the UK is reclaiming the narrative. So I'm thinking now, if you, in terms of, you've just said to me, the way it was explained to you to handle yourself didn't allow you to recognize your true value, allowed you to approach life differently. How different are you now from the teenage boy growing up?
So the issue is, I think, for most people, whether they realize it or not, and definitely after spending time really reflecting on a lot of things, whether on my own or with counseling services or whatever, you realize that many of us are just little boys in big men's bodies. We still got that little boy in there. So I think, as I look back, I can see that there are many repercussions and overspills of that kind of mindset. And as I said, quite clearly from the start, I don't look at my mum as the problem for that or what have you, because they were trying to deal their best with the cards that they were given, and a lot of these issues I still feel as though they probably were not aware of. So the issue is that in those rooms, in those situations, I wasn't really aware a lot of the times that it was racism. I just felt, okay, I don't fit in here, or okay, is there something wrong with me? So the actual kind of environment that we're in as well, where I think this country is very under the radar in its racism, it can be quite shocking when you see it for what it is. And the fact that it's not recognized and it's not owned up to in many scenarios really
Yeah.
leaves many young people disoriented as to what's going on here, what's the problem, am I the problem?
Yeah. It does affect your self-concept, your self-esteem, and the way you actually place yourself in the society, because it's very subtle. It's a very subtle, and you're given the impression you have a chip on your shoulder, and so you constantly have to be recentering yourself. Now, you went to school, you went through the secondary school system. How successful were you in the secondary school system?
Can you repeat that
Yes,
question?
I think we just lost a bit of connection there. So how successful were you in the secondary school system, and what did you do next?
So interestingly enough, if you add on top of that dynamic, the fact that we moved around a lot.
Mm.
My mum, when I was probably about 7 years old, she got married. Um, so I had a stepfather in the house, and we ended up moving around quite a lot. Maybe I would say during my schooling years, I probably went to about 4 or 5 different schools. And the last school that I went to was what we call a middle school
Mhm.
and an upper school. So essentially I moved from what would have been a secondary school starting there at 11. Then we moved districts to somewhere called Telford. And then
I
my
know
middle
Telford.
school, um, uh, yeah, Telford out there, yeah. So we moved to a middle school, which would have been, which would have been a school that was already established, and I think the years are probably something like 8 to 12 or 8 to 13, something like that. And then you'd go to an upper school. In the same time as moving to those schools, they were also in a restructure internally. So they were shifting from an upper school to a secondary school. So a lot of back and forth. And I only mention that because it really unsettled my education process. I yeah, so I got into what was called the upper school, which changed into a secondary school, which meant they changed all of their
Curriculum.
examination criterias and started to try and implement GCSEs in new subjects. And we were the first year trialing that. So essentially, what it meant is, I'm trying to explain it in a brief way, but what it meant is all my
That's fine.
subjects suddenly changed, went under different examination boards, and essentially my reports had always been that Chris is a very bright boy. He doesn't concentrate enough. He doesn't, he doesn't concentrate enough. He just needs to focus, what have you. But then what I also didn't realize at the time until I went to university is that I was dyslexic. So my work would always take me twice as long as everybody else. And essentially I think I did a mediocre. So I got A's in some subjects and I got C's in some subjects, and I probably left with about maybe 6 or 7 GCSEs, but they were all quite sporadic in terms of my scoring.
Yeah. I was thinking about the impact that all the moving would have had on you emotionally and socially, and also in terms of school. And I was saying, I wondered how well you coped with it. And I'm now seeing that your life at that time was quite layered and more complex than you might have realized. Moving, a new family, a new school, making new friends, adjusting, and not realizing that you had a need and your teachers did not pick it up. And that
No,
would have
yeah,
compounded school for you.
definitely, definitely. And also in school, I was definitely me and my brother. We were apart from one other person. We started as the only blacks in the school, and then as we went up and we moved into this upper school, there was also another black. But literally, there was a lot of pressure. Like, who are these people? Are they runners? Are they good
Ooh.
footballers? Because that's all they
Ah,
knew of black people. So it was a strange situation.
yes. You're put in a little box and you're expected to stay in that box. Um, how did it work out for you when were you able to fit in the box? Were you athletes? Were you sportsmen?
definitely not.
So,
Definitely not. And the thing about it was, because there were these expectations. I was thought to myself for a minute, God, maybe I'm going to be a good footballer because of the expectations outside. So then you'd kind of say to yourself, yeah, I'm going to try out for the football team, and then you'd realize that there was no superpower in being black. You were
yeah,
just as bad as the next guy. You were just as slow as the next guy. You know,
yeah.
yeah, it was a strange time. What I
So,
did I found that I would be trying to overcompensate to try and feel funny, you know, weren't funny, just trying to overdo everything to fit in.
yeah. And was it successful? You are the funny guy. Did
Um,
that make you feel as if you belonged? Did you have friendships, real friendships?
no, definitely not. In fact, interestingly enough, I would always get into I would say the kind of second to top tier of, so people would know me generally because I'm the only black guy. And what I do realize is, because we came from very humble beginnings as a family, my mum brought us up very well in terms of being humble, and uh, we see the word humility anyway, and being polite and not being fighters. I found that many of those things that she poured into us enabled us to, for people to be like, no, Chris is all right. He's a good guy. And I think that was what opened the doors. That was what kind of made, people kind of like us. But in terms of real friendships, interestingly enough, looking back, one of my closest friends was an Irish guy, and he too had been, from what I could tell, almost sidelined, if that made sense. And so me and him became very close. And it just so happened that he grew to be very tall. I was quite tall. And stage from spotty little boy to to a tall man. All of a sudden, all the good looking girls started to like him, and because I was his good friend, um, you know, I kind of, I kind of, I guess I kind of gained a little bit of popularity in that way.
Mm.
For me, what was quite disheartening and what would always make me feel as though I it added to that self-esteem issue, was because being black in that white community meant that a lot of the girls at that stage, they were intrigued, but
Mhm.
they could never bring you home, and you were still that person, as in, well, yeah, I don't know if I'd ever, kind of, I couldn't go out with a black guy or what have you. And this added to my mindset of maybe thinking that I was not good looking, thinking that I was, there was something wrong with me, or what have you. It really disturbed me about myself and my value.
Yeah. You mentioned something um early on about counseling, and not it's not quite the norm within the Black community to talk about counseling or therapy or any of those things. We are encouraged when it comes to our mental health to pray about it. What's your view on one, Black men's mental health and just praying about mental health?
So my family has been a family um, that has been very close to mental health issues. Um, and you're very correct in the fact that um, we are the type of people that would look at these issues and say, yeah, just pray about them and what have you. Um, I I don't want to say I'm a typical man, but many people listening might say that in terms of I'm not the guy who rushes to go and see a doctor. I'm not the guy who would normally have. In fact, when it comes to counselling, I often believe that it was just a load of rubbish. That it just didn't make any sense or what have you. And it was only, to be honest, when I hit crisis in my later years, so maybe 25 plus, when life had kind of dealt out some challenging cards, that after trying everything else, then I had a good friend, well, she's like a sister to me, who had become a counselor and really kind of said, man, you should check this out. And at first, I kind of, I poo-pooed that, left that to one side. But then when I tried everything else, I thought, you know what, I'm willing to give anything a go. And I did go through, tried different bits of counselling. Now, what I will say is that just because you go to see a counsellor doesn't mean counselling takes place. Sometimes you've got to kind of go through a few different. Counselors are just people, and you've got to find a scenario where the Lord is allowing a situation to open up where you are safe, and where you're connecting in that way, and where you really are striking up the type of relationship that is kind of helping you to propel forward. Otherwise, what you can find is that you're in a room bringing up lots of things and not necessarily being able to deal with them properly and kind of organize them properly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people just think, okay, I need a counselor, I'm just going to get a counselor because all counselors will work. But you mentioned something, you have to possibly try a few out and then find the right one that makes you feel safe. Because being in a safe space is so important, especially if the work is to take place in that space.
Definitely.
So you've mentioned that you reached you've had to decide that counseling therapy was important for you. Um,
Yeah.
Having reached that place in your life, how did the therapy work for you? What were some of the nuggets that you've taken away from the therapy or the counseling that has helped you to this point?
Well, the one, and it's quite interesting to come back to this point because it's a point that I think has kind of come to me over the last few months, few years maybe, which is that big boys do cry. Big boys do cry. Um, a lot of the rhetorics out there about men and supposed to be, especially a lot that come from our heritage, Caribbean or whatever, and African as well. Do you know what I mean? They're just not true. So this hard man mentality. The reality is, you do go through situations, and those situations will do you injury, and it's okay. It's okay. That's it's okay to go on through stuff and to talk about stuff. I didn't realize, we've had this conversation, we'd only been speaking for a couple of minutes or so, but as I've said different things, you've picked up and you've said, oh, Chris, well, going to different schools would have brought this issue, and being in a home that's changed would have brought this issue, and being in a school as the only Black person would have brought this issue. I had no idea. I had no idea up until 20, in my early 30s, that these things contributed to the way I was feeling. I had no idea that I had low self-esteem. I had no idea that some of these questions I was asking were not the normal questions that, next door neighbors might ask. I had no idea. And so that validation that it's okay, and the recognition of what had gone on, it was a big deal for me in counseling. Um, I think also understanding how God works in these scenarios, because I think as a Christian there is a mindset that, well, if you're going to see a counselor, then your faith or your Christianity must be weak, and you're not, this is wrong. But it's understanding that God interrelates with us where we are in this space through these facilities. And fortunately for me, my counselor was an Adventist. I didn't even know he was an Adventist until we started speaking about certain things, and I realized. But I had prayed that God would put me with a Christian, and if possible, an Adventist. I just didn't know it until we started speaking. I'd looked through Google, and I'd gone through the different counseling resources, and I worked out that this guy was a Christian. And so we started speaking, and it's only when he said, well, I can't do Saturdays, but I can do Sundays. I said, well, as a Christian, why I thought you'd be unavailable on Sundays, because most Christians here, they're at church on Sundays. And he said, no, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. You may not have heard of it. And cool, we got on like a house on fire. Yeah.
And it means therefore that there is a place for prayer with counseling.
100%.
There is a place, because God is, he's all knowing, and I think he has a lovely sense of humor as well, because quite often people say, just pray about it. And he's saying, yeah, pray about it so that I can lead you to the right one who will be there to help you. And the right person fell into your lap. Now, Chris, you are a dentist by profession. Why a dentist?
I am. Okay. When I was about 10 years old, I was in school, and we were playing about. We used to play this game called Stuck in the Mud. You put your arm on the wall, somebody has to go underneath you and free you. And as I went to go and free, and it's so interesting in the narrative, I was the last person who was free, and so again, I had this mindset of trying to fit in, trying to be the victorious one. And I'm running to set all my team free so I can gain some popularity points. And as I get to the wall, I tripped and went straight into the wall and broke my front tooth. And so what would happen is, over the next couple of years, my mum would take me to the dental hospital, spent a lot of time there. You'd see the dentists go in and out. And I always had a strong sense of family, that wherever I would get to in my career path, I didn't want to be away from my family. And so when people used to push that narrative, especially when we were younger, that the best thing to be is a doctor, a doctor is so highly esteemed, my mind said to me, well, yeah, I wouldn't mind being a doctor, but I don't think I could work nights. I don't think I'd work away from my family. So seeing these dentists who by inference are doctors, but they work solid hours, 9 to 5, I started to kind of just envision myself in that. And so fast forward, I then became, I didn't do great in my A levels or whatever. The pressures of life, I wasn't living at home anymore. I kind of drifted into music. And so I had a whole career in music. And then probably at the age of 33, I was abroad. I was living abroad as a minister of music out there. And I just got to the point where I felt I needed to do something else, because I was quite bored out there. I didn't, so I just asked God to show me. He kind of put a few pieces of the puzzle together, and then I met an orthodontist out there, a young black man who who had who had been orphaned when he was probably about 14 years old. His parents were strung out on drugs, and he ended up having to become the parent at 14 for his younger brother and sister. And as he was growing up and providing for them, he just felt inspired to do stuff. So he'd read a lot of books, and he became an orthodontist. Against all odds, people said you could never do it. He became an orthodontist. He picked up scholarships, and his story was so amazing and inspirational to me that I wish Sanjo I could tell you everything, but we might be here for ages. But literally, he inspired me, and just before I'd gone out to Seattle, Washington, I had also had a bit of an interesting scenario where I went to get myself checked out before I went to America, because their healthcare is not free. Hello, somebody. And I went to the dentist, and as I sat in the dentist chair, the dentist at the time, this is in the UK, he started speaking to me and said, "Chris, it's Chris, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Chris, it's blah blah blah." I won't say his name in public, but it's me. I did A levels with you, remember? And and I looked up in his face, and it was the very guy I'd done A levels with. He had a mask on, and he just said, "Take my number. If you need any help, I will. We can. And I said, "Well, I'm leaving in 2 days' time for America." While I was out there speaking with this orthodontist, it came back to my mind, such and such that you met 2 days ago. Let's have a conversation. And essentially from there, this guy hand held me through dentistry. He allowed me to do some work experience. And here we are, 10 years
Look
later.
at God. Look
Look at
at
that.
God. That is an awesome story. You had an idea because of what has happened to you. The Lord said, let that idea stay. Then you became a minister of music. You went about, you met this black orthodontist, and then you remembered that you had met your school pal. Look at
Yes.
it. Our lives are never linear.
They're never,
The,
never.
the hills and the valleys are there for a reason. So you I want to talk a little bit about your ministry of music, but I want to go back to you're being an orthodontist on that road. So you came back from Seattle, you came
Yes.
to the UK, you signed up, you went to uni, you did all your courses, you had your work experience with your school pal. Was it still easy with him helping you?
Oh no. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And there were many, many times, because you have to imagine, the pathway to get into dentistry is very, very narrow, especially at that age. I think it doesn't matter which age you are, but at that age, you're going to make up, maybe 2% of the class, because everybody else is the Grady Grays who have gone and studied here and got 10 A stars and what have you. So there's a little window for mature students, which God showed me stage by stage where I need to go, and he put me through that. And even when I went into that scenario, very few of the mature students who were on the class got in. In fact, there was two of us from my year, and then the two of us that got in, one of us, which obviously wasn't myself, praise God, had to drop out because the grades were not good enough from what I remember. I can't remember, clearly, but essentially, even then on the course, we are dealing with young, fresh minds compared with, and it was the first
Material.
it was the first time I realized, number one, that I had dyslexia, and I realized that in my second year, because I was literally staying up, you know, all day and all night trying to get work done, trying to transcribe lectures, and I was still kind of struggling to get through. So we had that conversation, and I realized I'm dyslexic. So that was the first thing. Learning how to learn with that learning challenge. Um, but I remember also going through a particular stint where I was just so low. I was dealing with the breakup of a relationship, and I just couldn't do it. And I started to consider taking antidepressants. Somebody in my uni, they were like, Chris, I think you should take antidepressants because you're going through such a rough time. I'm taking them, and it's really helped me, and what have you. And I prayed, and I thought, and I had some counsel, and in the end, that's not a road I went down, and I'm not trying to make a judgment call for others, but God really helped me in this scenario, and there was one message, and it probably goes back to what you asked me about the nuggets that I would share. At the time, I just couldn't face it, and I remember I was praying with somebody, and they said to me that the word that God has placed on them is just keep showing up. Don't think about the work, just show up. And I remember taking that and saying, Lord, I don't know how to process this because we've got so much work to do. But the word for the season was just keep attending. And so I would wake up and I would just literally drag myself into the lectures, sit myself down at 9 o'clock. And I don't know how, but somehow God just got me through that season. Just show up. So sometimes some people come to me for counsel, and as the Lord and the Spirit leads, I just say, look, just put yourself in the position, just show up and let God do the rest, because I'm a living testimony of that being what God had done for me.
Fantastic. I'm sitting and I'm just impressed. I'm moved. I'm inspired, and I'm loving your story. You were talking and you don't know how God did it. And Travis Green has a song which says, I don't know how, but he made a way.
Yes,
He
yes.
made a way. And God has obviously been charting your course. He has been charting your course. Let's just backtrack a little. Ministry of Music. How did that come about?
My mum was a guitar player. She would always sing and songwrite and do guitar. Now, interestingly enough, my mum, she has a kind of situation with her hands where she is not as she doesn't have the manual dexterity of normal guitarists, but she uses what she has and she will sing. And many people have been blessed by her ministry. And so what it meant as a child, we often would be around her when she's singing, when she's working out harmonies with people. So we naturally had like a bit of an understanding of harmonies, without the educational music aspect of it, but just an understanding of
That's
it.
right.
And so what that meant is, as I would grow up, I'd always be interested in musical instruments. I'd always be the one when she's trying to sing during worship, I'm banging the pots and all this kind of thing. And she's like, stop making that racket. You know what I mean? But eventually I pestered and pestered. And then my stepdad got me a keyboard. And essentially, I think I was probably about 13 or 14 when I started my first church group. And it was so strange because you got this little, in fact, I would have been younger. I'd probably have been about 10, 9 or 10. And you've got this little 9 or 10-year-old getting together all these, they would have been 16, 17-year-olds. And I'm leading this group. And what it did is that when I had left the church, which I did when I was about 17, I was always interested in music, hip hop music, different music, always making little tapes and stuff like this. And then at the age of 20, maybe 19, someone invited me to a Kirk Franklin concert. I wasn't going to church, they just invited me. Um, and I went there and I saw what this artist was doing, and it reached me. Now I know I don't always follow what what's going on, and as time goes, you kind of see different things. But people are people, so you're gonna see different
Sure.
things. But God used him in a mighty way to call me, and I gave my life to Christ. And so I realized that you can't always paint or tarnish somebody, because God can use me, and I'm a sinner. So I really had a love, and I still have a love for a lot of Kirk Franklin's music, because it spoke to me. This is what God used. And so essentially, choir called the More Than Life Choir, on my way back into church at the age of 20. I formed this choir, lots of young people from the community and from the churches, and we went around ministering in different places. A lot of it, the church people at the time was like, "Oh, this music is it's too racy. It's not right." But I definitely saw ministry take place with these young people as we grew together in the love of God. And then, basically, off the back of that, I've always had musical bands or groups, and it was off the back of a group that I work with called The Company, or Brooks and the Company. We went out and we did a little mini tour of some places in America. One of them was Seattle, and the conference out there asked me, basically offered me a job as the minister of music for the conference out there. So that's how it all came about.
So this little boy from Birmingham,
This little boy from Birmingham.
yes, is a music director. He's a music minister. He is now a dentist, but that's not all you are. You have a family. How has your lived experiences charted your way as a father, as a husband, as a family person?
Okay, so interestingly enough, I have many godchildren, but I don't have any children. So
Yes.
I abstain on that one for now. But who knows where God will lead. But
He has been leading all along. He won't stop now.
but yeah, as a husband, definitely, I think number one, and just being very transparent, I think I am. I know I had the little miniature spell where, when I was 17 to 19, maybe 16 to 19, I left church. But generally speaking, I've always looked at myself as the one that kind of stayed. And what I mean by that is, normally most of my friends had left when they were 20s and had left and not come back. But I am the one out of my group of friends that I grew up with, and many of them were pastors' sons and what have you in Birmingham. We'd all moved together. Many of them don't attend, so I am the one that stayed. Oh, even in our WhatsApp group, I don't say that because Chris, the elders on the line, what have you. But what it did mean is that I grew up with a mindset of not necessarily realizing it, but thinking at the time that, oh, that would never happen to me. Oh, that would never happen to me. Oh, you know, pregnant out of wedlock. That's not going to happen to me. I was just quite, and then it's when I went through crisis in, age 25, I just realized, Chris, who do you think you are? Like, you realize that there's a saying my friend has, that a sinking man will grab onto anything, even straw. And you find yourself in spaces where you are doing all the things that you thought you would never do. You're doing, you are hanging on to relationships that you shouldn't be in. You're drinking, you're in different spaces. And what it did was made me realize, especially when you're in music and people can hold you on a pedestal when they see you in ministry spaces or popular spaces. That, but for the grace of God, we are all, we are all found wanting publicly. You know what I mean? Most of us are found all of us are found wanting privately. But it really made me realize just how vulnerable, weak, poor, miserable, naked, wretched, blind I am. And I think these are things that you need to know if you are going to be a husband and if you are going to serve your church. You have to understand that it's all God. God uses messed up people. And what we really need is people who can acknowledge that and can show the love and the grace and the mercy of God. And understand that the gospel message is relevant for today, because what it says is, it doesn't say I'm a sinner and I'm going to stay here. It says I'm a sinner. I don't want to be a sinner. I want to face this way. And the only way that's going to happen is by God's grace, which is it needs to wash me and cover me and change me. And so my experiences have really helped me in that space. And I'm still a mess and I'm still trying, but this is how I would say my experiences have helped me in my family life.
I have been blessed by hearing your story, hearing all the twists and the turns, the roads that the Lord has taken you. My program is called It Is Possible Tuesdays, and I just want you to think back through your life, and what in your life would you use as the pivotal moment or event that has said to you, it is possible?
There are too many. There are too many. Even as you say, a young boy from a single family, poor single family, a young boy who yearns even now for that father figure. A young boy who's dyslexic and didn't even know it for countless years. A young boy who's never had, never had that dad, that showed him how to do this or how to do that, but has always had the father. You know what I mean? Has always had the father, and it's something. It's never a one time saying that it's possible. It's something that you just every day it's proven to you time and time again. But I've seen so many prayers answered. I've seen so many prayers answered. I've seen prayers that seem like foolishness that have been answered. I've seen prayers that have not even got to my mouth, but have just been in my heart, and I've seen them answered. And so every step of the way, for me to give you, bit by bit, we'd be here, for the rest of the year. But there's so many. I remember distinctly being outside prayer meeting and looking out and realized that the car that I parked just across the road from church, my baby car, it was a Ford Puma, little black one. People used to say, "What's a tall man like you doing in such a small car?" Parked outside opposite prayer meeting, and something in me just went to look out, and I realized it was gone. And I thought to myself, "Cool, I'm sure the yellow line restrictions are not applicable now." I called the council to see if anyone had towed my car away. It wasn't until later that night I realized it was stolen. And so I was surrounded by the mothers in Zion, and we prayed. It had all my stuff in there, my house keys, what have you. And we prayed, and there was just this peace in me that just was, I don't explain it, but I was just at peace. The short story is that maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, when I was just about to call the insurance company to say to them, let's forward the claim, I'd already called them to tell them it was missing. A friend of mine calls from maybe a couple of miles away and says, your car's downstairs outside my house. I says, how do you know it's my car? They said, well, it's got your registration plate on it. I mean, and she said, come now. And I went there. They called the police, and literally, as I got there, the police were there with the person in my car, and they led the guy away. Then I inside the car, and everything down to the little £3.50 that I keep in the glove compartment, everything was there, everything. And I say that just to say it's the prayers, it's the peace that God had put on me, that you're outside prayer meeting of all places for the enemy not to want to attack you. It's outside your prayer meeting. And so I say there's 100 other stories I could share with you, but it is possible. It is possible.
It is possible. That has, I think that is it is possible for the year, or for the years that I've been around, that for your car to be taken and then to be deposited at your friend's house, put it that way.
Yes.
That is the impossibility of God coming through.
100%.
Elder, doctor,
Yes.
brother,
Chris will do.
You have been an inspiration, and I know that my audience will have been blessed having listened to you today. There's so many things, and something that stood out for me is that even in all of your not lack of awareness as you were growing up and so forth, when you were a child, you were a leader, but you didn't even realize it. But for you to have been able to pull up a group together to sing, you were a leader. God knew you were a leader from then, and He had been doing everything to ensure that you would eventually be a leader in the public sphere, in the church sphere, to bring honor and glory to Him.
Praise God.
It has been a pleasure having this conversation with you. I am so grateful that you've taken the time to, talk with me today. And I know that you have inspired quite a number of people to look at themselves and recognize that, yes, it is possible. It doesn't matter where you've started. It doesn't matter what you've thought about yourself. God has your back, and therefore He will be opening doors for you. Thank you very much for being my guest today on It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanya. I want to remind my listeners, be a dreamer, a doer, and a thinker. See possibility everywhere. Because you're alive, everything is possible. But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, with men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and see you next time on It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanya. Thank you.
When I call on Jesus, all things are possible. I can mount on wings like eagles and soar. When I call on Jesus, mountains are gonna fall. 'Cause He'll move heaven and earth to come